Welcome to the Press Pause, a podcast by D-Term. Hi there. Welcome to today's podcast episode called Mastering B2B Tech PR, Lessons from a PR Pro. Our PR Pro mentioned today is Scott Baradell. Please tell me I said that right.
You said it perfectly.
Awesome. Scott is the CEO and founder of Idea Growth and author of Trust Signals, Brand Building in a Post-Truth World. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you so much for having me.
How do you feel? How's your day going?
My day is going great so far. It's earlier for me than it is for you, so far so good. I got all 5 kids off to school, so that's a win. It's my first win.
The biggest win so far.
Right.
That's awesome. Please, Scott, would you mind giving us a little introduction to your expertise and your background?
Well, yeah, I mean, I describe myself as a writer and entrepreneur because I started my career as a journalist. I did that for years and then went into corporate marketing and corporate communications mostly for tech companies for the second part of my career. And then 18 years ago now, I started my own B2B Tech PR firm called Idea Growth and have been doing that ever since. We've got about 30 people. We're based in Dallas, Texas. Most of our clients are US based, but we do have some international clients also. And just came out with a book last year, so that's been exciting. So that's what I'm up to.
That does sound very exciting. I love the fact that you describe yourself first as a writer and then as an entrepreneur. Just goes to show how much you probably invested in this book. But before I'd like to hear more definitely during our podcast, but we'd love to start with what do you think about the current state of B2B Tech PR, since this is your expertise, and like what is your perspective on what it's like today?
Well, I think that B2B Tech PR as a discipline and B2B Tech marketing as well have become just a bigger and bigger thing, and that continues. It's kind of where it's at in terms of tech PR. You know, you go back a few years, and all the focus in tech was on consumer products, and now, you know, so much of what's driving change and driving interest. You look at AI, you look at machine learning, Internet of Things. You know, these are all coming from B2B and often, you know, touching consumers. But a lot of the biggest concerns are interests around, say, a Chat GPT, for example. Consumers know, oh, this is fun to play with and use. But in the business world, there's concerns and interest in, is this going to overturn everything? Is it going to change literally everything in terms of how people work? So it's more of a B2B question than a B2C question. And I think that's something that's really changed in the last few years is the B2B has used to be in the background because you think about, you know, B2B tech being very arcane and you know, you really have to be an IT person, you know, to understand it, kind of thing. And it used to be in the early days, you know, we were largely selling to IT departments in B2B PR. That's who our biggest audience was. And over the last 20 years, that's changed dramatically to where we're mostly speaking to business buyers, marketers, people who are non-technical, who are buying products and services for their organization. And that's how B2B Tech PR has evolved. But it's never been at this point, I think, before, where it's really driving the bulk of conversations about technology today.
For sure. Absolutely. I love that you mentioned AI. It's, you know, significantly been influencing how companies have been working, especially, for example, in Determ as well. Like most of our focus is how we can, you know, incorporate all these elements into our systems. But I also wanted to ask you, like, what are some of the key differences between nowadays between B2B and B2C? Like, how do you tailor your approach for B2B clients, tech clients?
Yeah, well, it starts with, you know, you the biggest differences are, even if you are selling your product, or your client is selling their product primarily to a business buyer rather than a technical buyer, you still need a greater level of technical knowledge, because you're talking about if you're talking about an ERP system or a CRM, or whatever it might be within an organization, you kind of need to know how the parts of a business work, and you need to know a little more detail than if you're, say, doing consumer tech PR for the latest smartphone. It's just a different level of kind of inside baseball knowledge that you need in order to connect with the the folks that you're trying to reach, because influencers, analysts, this whole kind of universe of influence that's been built up in tech PR that buyers use to figure out who they want to where they who they want to buy from is it's just more elaborate. The purchases are generally bigger, which lends itself to longer sales cycles too. So you have to build relationships and grow them over time. You're not necessarily looking at, unless you're also doing inbound marketing, you're not also necessarily looking at, um, you know, driving the buyer down a funnel over a long sales cycle, but you are looking into maintaining their interest over a long period of time. And you can do that through things like thought leadership. You can do that through being involved in causes, the community, industry organizations. There's just a lot of things that you need to approach in B2B Tech PR that I would describe kind of more of the long game, where you're building up relationships over time, you're learning technology and building on that knowledge over time, you're working with products that you're selling over a longer period of time. Not always the case, because there's obviously B2B tech SaaS products that someone could buy with subscription by going to a client's site. But the fundamental difference of B2B tech PR is in those things.
Would you say these things differentiate based on, like, if you are for mid businesses or smaller businesses or bigger ones, like, for example, smaller or medium-sized businesses, would they also focus on these long-term, reputation building, or, should they communicate more like technical details about their products, for example, SaaS or anything similar to that? Like, what do you think is the best way?
Well, you kind of have to do both, but I would say that to the extent you are focusing, the the technical knowledge is kind of skin in the game, but you don't want to lead with that. So in other words, this goes back to why I started Idea Grove. I started Idea Grove because at the time, and I was working for B2B tech companies, the PR firms I worked with, and this was sometimes very large PR firms, global PR firms, they didn't have anybody on the staff who was at least working with our account, even when we were paying a good amount of money, who really understood the business very well. As a result, and at the time, a lot of times they didn't even have writers on staff. They would outsource that. Content has become much more central to PR than it was back then. But I'd often get press releases, white papers, other content that I thought was really superficial and that wouldn't earn credibility with the media and the analysts, the Gartners, and all those that I was trying to reach. And so I ended up doing all that writing myself, because I just wasn't satisfied with the depth of knowledge was sufficient to establish credibility with the audience. And so that's kind of really was what started Idea Grove. Was the first people I hired were writers. I hired a writer who had been an IT manager for 20 years and things like that, because my thought was, PR shouldn't be about, trying to schmooze people and take them to lunch and they're going to cover your client because of that. They're going to cover you because you've earned their trust and you've established credibility by knowing their world, understanding how to translate what a client is doing in a way that becomes a story for them, that they see why they should take an interest in it. And you can't really do that without some technical knowledge. Having said that, if you lead with the technical knowledge, if you lead with speeds and fees, then you risk quickly commoditizing yourself. So, in other words, you can have a first mover advantage. You can be doing something first. And yeah, as long as you have that, sure, go lead with that. But before long, you're going to have competitors and then be others. And whether or not they can do exactly what you can do, they're going to say they can do what you can do. And there's very little that can be done to prove to the media that my speeds and feeds are better than their speeds and feeds. I used to work for a company with wireless networking. And we knew from our coverage maps and how we built out our wireless network that we had the densest coverage. But our competitors, and we had 3 or 4, their coverage maps and the way they position the story, they were telling the media that they did. So what that means is whether or not you had that technical advantage, unless it's very, very clear, it's probably not the best thing to lead with. Don't lead with your coverage maps. So I would say that's true for B2B tech in general. Don't lead with the technical unless you're way, way, way out in front of everybody else or highly differentiated. The better thing to do is lead with a brand story. All right. So is Volvo safer than any other car? No, I mean, not really. Maybe there are a couple brands I might say it is, but for most brands, I would say no, right? But they decided, they obviously have a lot of safety features and things in their cars. They emphasize that. Fundamentally not a safer vehicle. But for years, their whole entry into the market was aiming for people who wanted luxury with safety, and that's how they did every ad. When meanwhile, the folks they were competing with, Mercedes or others, would be focusing on performance and someone speeding down the highway at 80 miles an hour. Very different image from I'm putting my baby in a car seat in the back seat. Cars probably don't really have the kind of differences that those brand choices represent. But if both cars just opened up their hoods and said, "Hey, take a look," most buyers would be just confused, right? They wouldn't know the difference. So you have to, and that's something that we have to educate our clients about a lot, is that because sometimes in B2B tech, especially mid-size, the CEO is an engineer, and they're thinking very mathematically, and they're thinking very logically. I'm Spock. I don't buy based on emotion. And everyone buys based on emotion. The biggest B2B purchases are based on emotion. That's just how it is. So we have to show that the importance of telling that larger brand story that embeds your product story, embeds your differentiation, embeds all those things into it, but don't lead with that.
Love that example that you just mentioned for Volvos. I mean, it's almost the exact same thing that Apple does nowadays, and it kind of the way they, made the audience believe that it's something prestigious in a way that now the audience even defends Apple when it stands up against Samsung, or it's very like you said, like they built this brand around this story, and they never divert from this path. They always kind of keep it the same.
Yeah, I think there's a great talk that's online that Steve Jobs said years ago. I don't remember what year, but I think it was when he had started Apple, then he got forced out, and then he came back later. And then that's when, and when he left, he went to Pixar and other successes. And then when he came back, Apple was down. And he brought them back up. And basically his message was that the company had allowed itself to focus too much on the speeds and feeds and getting into the details of products like the Newton and other things that I was doing at the time. And he shut down the Newton. He said, what are we doing here? Let's think first about what's our larger purpose. What are we here for? And let's take technology out of the equation for a minute. And from there, you start to really focus around who you're creating your products for. And once you start thinking about that, then you're not just thinking about technical specs, you're thinking about all of the aspects of the product experience and the customer experience that will reaffirm that identity and that alignment or connection to the people you're selling to. And he just showed very dramatically, of course, had some huge product successes like the iPhone. And the iPhone, look, having been, I happened to be in wireless comm at that time, and if you were around in 2007 when the iPhone came out, that was like nothing anyone had ever seen before, because at the time, all of the leaders in making cell phones, like Motorola was one of them at the time, and others, they were the whole process was driven by engineers, and you could tell in the user experience. And Steve Jobs flipped that on its head. Obviously, he had great technicians, great coders, all those things, but it had to start with this vision of what he wanted it to be, and then making that happen, as opposed to how cell phones had been up to that time, when it was just kind of this incremental change led by the technology, led by little incremental advancements in technology. He flipped that all on its head, and that's why. Excuse me for my cough. I'm getting over a cold, but that's why he's ultimately a brilliant marketer first and foremost, and that's why so many people in PR and marketing can learn so much from his example.
Sorry, had a little connectivity issue here, so Scott needed to repeat some parts for me. Keep listening.
I was just saying that ultimately, they had the great technicians at places like Motorola, and they were incrementally, and Ericsson and others that were making phones at the time, Nokia, and they were incrementally improving the technology of phones, but not fundamentally improving the user experience with the phone. And that's what Steve Jobs did, and that's why I say he's such a great example, first and foremost, for marketers, PR people, because he led a technology company, but was ultimately a marketer first, and that's why they've been so successful. And of course, since he passed away, they've tried to carry his example on, and all the things that he built on, but I think you've started to see some degradation there. So it just speaks to, the impact a single person can have, to go from building this company, being forced out, watching the company decline. He comes back, completely resurrects it with these incredibly innovative products driven by a marketing mind rather than a technical mind. And now you're kind of seeing Apple try to hang on to what he built, I think, at this point.
Definitely. I feel like so far they've, it's been, I feel like it's still existing, Apple's still very much there, but at this point it's kind of like, it's not as revolutionary as when he was here. It was all the rage. Everybody was talking about it. Now it's just kind of like upgrading on what's already there and not really making that big of an impact as they usually, as they were before. But
Yeah.
I wanted to,
I was just going to say, and ironically, the nemesis of Apple was always Microsoft, and Microsoft was on track to dominating everything until around 2000 or so, when the U.S. government said they weren't allowed to bundle Internet Explorer with computers that had Windows, and so Microsoft's chance to take its lead into the internet was not allowed to happen. Others have put Microsoft behind them. Microsoft became largely something on the business side, where it I think made the most hay. But now with ChatGPT, Microsoft has a chance to soon, if not already, start to be seen as more innovative than anybody, including Apple. So interesting how these things are cyclical, that none of it stays the same.
Oh, never. I feel like in this industry, it's always just change at the leading role. Everybody's, competing so much. Have you seen like the latest thing that they've launched, the co-pilot, the whole assistant to their suite? I mean, that's just crazy. I feel like it's going to change, how people work nowadays so much. ChatGPT has done its share, but this is just another level for sure.
For sure.
But I wanted to ask you if you could share some examples that you've had maybe from successful B2B tech campaigns that you've developed.
Yeah, I mean, let's see, from gosh, the early days, we had a client for about a decade that had started out actually with a B2C product. There was just literally two founders, two-person company, bootstrapped, and they wanted to compete with job sites like the Ladders and others that were, trying to distinguish themselves by surfacing job opportunities for higher earning people, and to give them kind of more of a white glove service. That was the idea. But they flipped it to being a B2B technology company focused on outplacement. So that's where a big company lays off a lot of employees, and the services that you offer the people you've laid off to kind of ease the blow, helping them, giving them tools to find another job, maybe office space to kind of go look for their next job in, educational tools if they want to learn a new career, different things that companies, particularly larger companies, do. And it turned its product into this. The company's called RiseSmart, and eventually they got funding, moved out to Silicon Valley. What we did, I think, a great job with them is helping them, even though they were small, to look bigger. And I think a lot of clients come to us who are mid-sized, sometimes smaller than mid-sized, and they're having to compete with kind of what we say in the US anyways, that 800-pound gorilla, the very, very big company in their space. And it can be often that big company gets the great bulk of the media attention. It's natural for a reporter, particularly reporters, media organizations are understaffed today, so sometimes you have to do what's easiest. And so if you have to call someone to get a comment on a story, you might typically just call the person at the biggest company in the space. And so you might have a lot of mid-sized players that are just struggling to be seen and to be noticed and to get their share. And that's true with not just with media coverage, but in trying to win big clients too. I mean, HR departments tend to be fairly conservative in how they make purchases. So if you look at an HR department at a Fortune 500 company, $1 billion company, how do you get them to choose a startup that has two people? That's really hard to do. So we helped them get their first client. That was ACS. They were a Fortune 500 company at the time, since been acquired by another company. But worked with them to, someone from that company ended up agreeing to be on RiseSmart's board of advisors and a reference, using that to get other larger companies to take a look as the company grows. This turns into a story that we eventually got them on the front page of the Wall Street Journal to talk about how this startup had managed to completely disrupt the business model in the outplacement industry, which had been basically controlled by 2 or 3 big players for a very long time. And it ended up 10 years later, the company was acquired by Randstad, the second biggest staffing company in the world, for $100 million. And so that's the kind of thing that it's fun to be a part of. We did all kinds of things to help them as a smaller company to stand out and in cases get more attention than, if you looked at share of voice, than some of the biggest players, the big players in their space. We did something that was just an example of kind of the fun things we did, where we wanted to, the CEO had always had this dream of like, I want to be covered, I want a Super Bowl angle. I'm like, you want a Super Bowl angle? You're a B2B tech company that has software to help large companies do outplacements when they lay off people. What does that have to do with the Super Bowl? But I was just playing around one night with some Bureau of Labor Statistics. That's an agency in the U.S. Some statistics with unemployment, and I stumbled upon this thing that obviously is coincidental, which was that in almost every case, if you looked at the two football teams that played in American football teams that played in the Super Bowl, the team representing the city with the lower unemployment rate won almost every time. It had won just like 25 out of 30 times, something crazy like that. And it was true. It was all backed by the data. We could share the data with reporters. So what we did is we put, based on that, we put out a Super Bowl prediction every year. This is our Super Bowl prediction based on this trend. Hey, we can't say, there's lots of people in sports and sports betting and all that are pretty superstitious, right? So we're like, hey, this is, and then we put some arguments behind it that were all kind of tongue in cheek, but it's like, maybe in the places where with lower unemployment rates, the fans, are in a position to buy more gear and to go to more games and to be bigger fans, whatever. We just kind of developed this whole logic behind why this could possibly be the case, when in all likelihood it was just a weird coincidence that we stumbled upon. But we did this for, I think we stopped working for them after they got bought, but I believe they still do that every year. Probably been doing it for about 15 years now. And it was just something fun. So it's just an example. And the thing is, for a company like them, it got them covered on CNN, ESPN, just a lot of TV coverage that a company like that in B2B tech generally would just not get. And it's just an example of how we tried to think outside the box.
Oh, that's really cool. I love that. I mean, it always goes to show, like, all these things that make it to the media in a way that they become viral and other media companies pick it up. It's usually something that is very applicable to different situations. And I had a guest before. It was Natalie. She was from Hi Bob. It's a HR company in the UK. And she also said that one of their biggest campaigns was when they picked upon since March was Women's Month. They had a research done, and it was a correlation for like UK women and their job opportunities. It was about the pay gap and everything else, and it was one of those stories that all of the media wants to read about, especially in this period. So it was they gave them something that they were looking for. It was not the other way around. They weren't asking to be put in this media, but it was something that they wanted to feature in their newspaper for that period. So it's always easier when you don't have to push people around for their sleeves. Please post that. So that's a really cool example. I mean, everybody always talks about Super Bowl, even internationally.
Well, a big part of what we do today for our PR clients is we help them with digital PR, which is that marriage of PR and SEO, where we're focusing not only on getting media mentions, but also backlinks. And the best way to get backlinks through media coverage is not to just hope they're going to link to your homepage, but to have a valuable resource that they would have a reason to link to. And so what we've had a lot of success with is surveys. So the surveys can be on any topic that's going on that our client's audience would be interested in, that we can tie back to some part of the client's point of view or thought leadership platform or whatever, as something that lives as a blog post or a landing page on the client site that we can get links back to. We've had a lot of success with that. And the big thing that the Super Bowl campaign reminded me of, the big thing that we need to kind of educate our clients on is that when you're first talking about surveys, they tend to think in terms of market research. Oh, well, okay, well, let's do a survey of IT managers of companies between 1,000 and 5,000 employees. I'm like, no one cares what they think. I mean, it's like, what am I going to do with that survey? I'm not going to get any coverage of that survey anywhere. So what if we figured out how to, don't think, yes, you're trying to sell to IT managers at companies of this size. That's fine. IT managers don't only want to read, even IT managers don't only want to read about other IT managers. Believe it or not, there's other things they want to read. There's other things they want to consume in terms of information. So think about just a topic, any topic that your audience would find interesting that you can tie back to yourself in some way. And that's a good topic. And by doing that, you can find topics that not only your audience, but that a lot of other people might be interested in. And using that basic approach, we've done 8 digital PR surveys, as we call them, in the last 6 months or so for clients. They've all been extremely successful in terms of the coverage they've achieved for our clients. So this will be things like we have a client that does back office, like payment processing kinds of things, and we did a survey that was related to sustainability, because they have a thought leadership platform that includes sustainability, and it was a way to kind of bring that back to the business and how the business brand tells its story. We had a client that was, it can come directly back to a client's value proposition. We had a client that sells software and gear to help equip people in retail stores to better talk to each other through wirelessly and things like that, and to have data automatically available to them when someone asks them a question in the store and so forth. We did a survey that showed after the holidays that showed people were coming back to retail in greater numbers than ever after COVID, but they were not completely satisfied in the experience. They remember their experiences in retail before COVID being better, and they were citing reasons like the staff isn't knowledgeable enough. There's not enough, and these happen to be issues that were driven by the fact that people were used to shopping online so much. You could get limitless information in your research, and you were used to that. And then you get to the store because you want to go see the product live in the store. And then, the 18-year-old kid at the store doesn't have the training or knowledge to answer your questions, and it gets frustrating. So the data from the survey was showing that, and that got covered a lot of places. And it just happens that this client's products would address that issue for retailers. But we didn't lead with product, or didn't lead with, oh, wink wink, this means buy our product, because the survey itself was touching on a really interesting story of how were people experiencing retail in person after COVID versus before COVID. So this is the kind of thing that you can do in B2B PR and have a lot of success with if you kind of get beyond the product itself and start thinking a little more broadly.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So to mention your book, Trust Signals. So what are these trust signals actually that these companies need to build, and how did they actually build the trust and credibility in this space?
Well, trust signals are defined as the evidence points online that we use to either establish trust or that help us to feel a greater trust in a person or a brand. So for example, just the book itself. So I produced a book. As an author, I'm not well known. I'm not Stephen King or somebody like that. So I needed to include trust signals in the book, which a lot of authors do, like, those quotes you have from better known people that say this is a great book or this is a great writer or whatever. Those are trust signals. Those are third party endorsements that would make it more likely you might take a chance on buying the book, even though you weren't familiar with the author. Your bio and how well you put together your bio to establish your credentials is a trust signals. Outside the book, um, getting 5-star reviews on Amazon and getting a lot of them, that's a trust signal that would make someone more likely to buy the book. If you can get people that are well known among your audience in social media to say good things about it, appearing on podcasts, all these things for that segment of the audience that you're trying to reach, that can connect with you through that, those are trust signals. It's primarily the biggest, most important trust signals are forms of third-party validation. So other people and other organizations and other entities are saying good things about you, so you don't have to say them about yourself. Because people trust what other people say about you more than what you say about yourself. And so that's the fundamental idea of trust signals. And why I wrote the book is that I've seen over the years that it used to be okay for PR firms to really align themselves and their expertise around the news media, because it used to be the media were, there's a small number of media that served as huge gatekeepers and kind of arbiters of trust. And that's no longer the case. Everything is so fragmented that people don't make a buying decision or whatever your client is wanting them to do just based on a media story. They need a lot more than that. So trust signals tries to open the mind of PR people to say, let's not think of PR as media relations. Let's think of PR as building trust at scale. And if you think of PR as building trust at scale using a tool like trust signals, then you've given yourself a much broader canvas to work with beyond media coverage. So an example I give is like one of our employees who was having a baby. She and her husband had bought most of the things for the nursery. They'd already busted their budget. They still needed a crib mattress. They decided, well, let's get something really inexpensive because we're already over budget. So Lori goes to search, and she sees, just as she's starting to look around, she remembers that a year ago, before she was even pregnant, there had been a creator on Instagram talking about how important it was to get a non-toxic crib mattress for safety. And that has stayed with her. And so before she made the purchase of the inexpensive crib mattress, she started Googling like safest crib mattresses. She couldn't remember the name of the mattress brand this influencer or this creator had mentioned. But when she Googled in the first 2 or 3 results, that brand name came up. So then she started investigating, and then she found all these 5-star reviews of this brand mattress on Google. Then she does some more research, finds an article in Parents Magazine saying good things about this mattress. She goes to their website finally, and then there's this big seal from this certifying organization vouching for the quality and safety and non-toxicity of this crib mattress. So finally she buys it. They end up spending twice as much as they were going to, but they felt a lot better about the purchase. And so I describe all these trust signals that she experienced towards making that decision as kind of breadcrumbs. Like it's a breadcrumb path of trust to make that purchase. And so what I tell traditional PR people is, would she have made that purchase if she had just read the Parents Magazine article? Probably not. She needed that combination of things. And that's why the biggest mission behind the book is just to encourage PR people to not continue to kind of paint themselves in this corner of tying themselves so closely to the media when there's so many other ways to build trust with your clients' customers today.
Absolutely. I feel like that's where, kind of the limit in between PR and marketing kind of gets lost. because what you would usually consider PR as just somebody that deals with media is now something that marketing used to do with the reviews and everything written online and case studies and all of those things. So it's kind of like, it's one role basically nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good way to think of it, and so I would argue that an advantage that PR should have. PR tends to kind of be slow to change, I guess. But I would say one advantage that it should have is that PR thinks about buying considerations other than the product itself. And PR thinks about audiences other than the customer. Marketing is built to think about the product and how to sell the product to the customer. But there's a bigger landscape now where PR can really lend itself to contribute, where lots of data is showing that, particularly among younger customers, values are often even more important than the quality of the product in making a purchasing decision. So you could buy a product. So maybe you've done your buyer persona research and all this, and they say, I want a product that's AYZ. But if you look outside the product, which a lot of marketers don't do, suddenly a characteristic that has nothing to do with the product, that has to do with the perceived values, political alignments, and other aspects of the brand, is the reason for the purchase. And that didn't used to be the case in the way that it is today. And I think PR thinks about things like that and always has. And then, marketing also tends to focus on the customer. Well, guess what? As we've learned through cancel culture and things like that, it's not just the customer that matters an audience. Obviously, employees have always mattered, investors have mattered, but just communities of interest matter. I mean, was it Wayfair, the online furniture company, was almost destroyed overnight by these random rumors from QAnon people that Wayfair was child trafficking through its armoires. Just this weird thing. None of these were likely Wayfair customers, but Wayfair could still be destroyed by its non-customers, right? So having a strategy to communicate and to diffuse and to establish a presence online where you're less likely to be the subject of an attack like that is very important. And because you're not talking about the customer, you're talking about other groups, often marketing doesn't really look at that. So all of these things that are happening in society today, they all point to ways that PR can contribute more than it often is contributing, if all it thinks about is media.
For sure. I love that you touched upon like negative, PR comments or just crisis in general. So in your case, in your experience with B2B tech clients, like how do they handle these, crisis situations, or like what are some of the steps that you would advise your clients when they, reach that point where they're maybe canceled or boycotted?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, I had a prospect that we've been talking with for about a year off and on, probably met with about 3 or 4 times, and they never wanted to pull the trigger in a program because they hadn't done it before. And now they're stuck in a crisis, and they're talking about bringing us in to help them through the crisis. And I'm not one to say I told you so, but it starts with proactively building a positive reputation online first. That makes everything else so much simpler. So you're not just stuck in a defensive position where the first thing the reporter knows about is this controversy you're involved in. So the example I give is a true story that early in my journalism career, there was a woman who had been hired to be a reporter. She was going to start the next Monday, but after she'd been hired the previous week, she was invited to a party that Saturday night before she was going to start on Monday. And it was all new people for her, so she's probably a little nervous, and she drank a lot. She drank way too much. Liquid courage, we say. And might have been okay, except what happened was she drank so much that she mistook the laundry room of the person's house for the bathroom and the dryer for the toilet. And that's the kind of thing that people can't help but tell other people, right, when that happens. And so everybody knew about it almost immediately. And guess what? She didn't show up on Monday. And she never showed up. And that, journalism jobs, particularly at that time, were not the easiest thing to come by. So she basically had determined that she had ruined her reputation in such a way that it just wasn't going to be worth it. Now, I just say compare that to someone who had maybe been at the newspaper for a long time, and they did the exact same thing. Well, they would come in on Monday, right? They would come in on Monday because they'd established themselves as a good employee and people knew and liked. So maybe would say someone, hey, I noticed you drank a little too much. Are you okay? Can I help you with something? People would have been more supportive. Maybe they would have joked about it a little bit, but it would have been something she could have gotten right through. So I say that's what crisis communications and reputation management is today. If you let people know who you are in an authentic way before the crisis happens, man, the crisis is the easy part. But if you don't do that, then the crisis is everything. And sometimes brands don't get through it.
Oh yeah, that's a very good example. Yeah, once you've set yourself as somebody that's always been good with the great customer support and everything else, like one little incident is not gonna destroy everything. Like, I don't know if you noticed, I think 7 days ago or something, I was like 14th of April, Netflix had a big streaming for their latest. I don't know if you're familiar with the Love is Blind.
Yes.
And it was a big deal. Their streaming was delayed. It wasn't on time. Everybody was kind of like, what is happening? I'm gonna cancel my. It was that type of crisis that just touched upon that day. It was a little bit of negative mentions about that. Everybody forgot about it tomorrow. Everybody still has their subscription because they're still, in the market as one of the leaders of streaming services. It doesn't even matter. They made this little mistake because, they've been serving us for so long.
And to your point about Apple, Apple's an example of a brand that has so many people that have invested their own identities with it, that they would be natural advocates. So if someone attacked Apple about something, there'd be all kinds of people who Apple had nothing to do with, who are just fans of Apple, who would step up and defend Apple before Apple did anything. So that's the kind of thing that can happen. The more you put on the front end to build that they say the best defense is the good offense. So proactively establishing a strong positive reputation is the best way to protect your reputation.
That is perfect advice. That one's for the book. So going into some a little expert tips that you might have. So when with B2B PR campaigns, what are how do you measure the success of them? Like maybe some metrics that you typically look at, like if you were to measure something like this, how would you?
Well, the metrics really vary a lot based on the campaign itself, but obviously the basics. What we don't do anymore are add value equivalency, which was the PR measurement forever. PR is historically just hard to measure because how do I, the reality is if you're in the New York Times, because I placed you in the New York Times, that's going to enhance your reputation. But rarely is it going to be, someone saw the article and they went and bought your products. It tends to be something that makes it easier for your marketers and your salespeople to do their jobs rather than to, be some trackable sale. So communicating to clients that what you're trying to do is to increase brand trust, brand awareness and trust um, that has to be established first, what the goal is. Because with particularly smaller companies, there's the misconception that PR is a form of lead generation when it's not. PR can makes it easier makes the leads better because people will know you when the salespeople contact them, but it's not a form of lead generation. So the kind of things we measure are overall increase in branded traffic to the website. So if more people are searching for your brand on Google, which is easy to measure, then that's a sign. In the absence of, say, a big advertising campaign or something that's putting your brand name everywhere, that your PR campaign could be a big contributor to that. Excuse me. In addition to that, if you're doing any kind of digital PR, like I mentioned before, the campaign content that you're putting together, we found in some cases the survey, for example, that we put together sometimes become one of the 3 or 4 biggest traffic pages of the client's website. So that's an entry point page that can lead to people finding out more about you. So that kind of traffic, overall search traffic, everything that we do, we typically do PR and content for clients. We tie to specific keyword strategies. So if we're seeing increase in search traffic as well, these are all the kinds of things that you can track directly based on your PR campaigns. If you're including SEO in it, as you should, you can be looking at the increase in the client's website domain authority and things like that as well. And if they're focused on a competitor or competitors, and they want to increase the attention they receive relative to their competitors, we typically report on share of voice as well. We'll report on things that the wire services and other tools provide, like mentions, impressions, things like that. But often those numbers are just so big, it's hard for the clients to really see the meaning in them. It's good to see those going up, but what does it really mean for their business? I think things like getting people to your website and increasing your website's visibility are very tangible signs to most clients that a branding campaign is having an impact.
Absolutely. That's, you can't go wrong with that. Maybe your reach is big, but if your traffic is not growing together with it, it doesn't mean that you're doing. I feel like one of the things that could be also connected to PR efforts is influencer marketing. I used to work in influencer marketing, and it's always about building trust with influencers as well, even though some of them might be, targeted with their content like down the funnel. Maybe they're, just for, decision-making process because you're giving a review of a product. If the potential customer doesn't click on the link in the bio of the influencer, it's so hard to say that this is what made them push them to make the purchase in the end. So I guess, it's the overall results that you gotta be looking into, and what have you been focusing your efforts mostly on? So I guess, like, if you're just doing one thing at a certain time, maybe that's going to be like the main differentiator to what's driving traffic. Like you said, if there's no advertising campaign at the moment and there's just PR going on, you kind of all know what's driving the traffic.
Exactly.
Love that. That's awesome. So what advice would you give to somebody in B2B tech that's just starting out with their PR efforts?
Just starting out, I think, you always start by understanding who your audience or audiences is. That's so important. It's surprising how many people don't do that, or might just rely on what the CEO says or what a couple salespeople say in terms of who their target audience is. It's really worth it. If you think about the time and effort and expense that goes into a PR program, it's really worth it to spend a little time and money on the front end to make sure that you're targeting the right people. Today more than ever, because audiences are so, every brand has a unique audience in a way that is different from, I think, any previous time in memory in PR, because there's so many variables. You've got to think about politics, values. You've got to think about business versus tech buyer. You've got to think about industries and how different industries have different sources of influence and how those have fragmented and changed. And so you really kind of have to do your research and then cobble together this path or trail of breadcrumbs or influence that you want to bring to your website or to your brand from your clients' from your clients' customers' online experiences. And that has to start by understanding where your customers go for information, what influences their decision making. Just a single thing like review sites. About half of reviews online today are Google reviews, but the rest are spread out across hundreds or even thousands of other review sites. And, it takes a lot of time and effort to put a review program together where you get your customers to leave you good reviews. They're not going to do that at sites. So you really have to understand which site or two is going to be the one that has the most influence with your customer base, the ones that they trust the most. How do you find that out? You can do a little research. You can do things like figuring out what review site is getting the most traffic for your keywords, or you can ask your customers. You can ask your customers about their sources of information. Typically, this is not something that's done in buyer persona research, but it's something that increasingly is well worth doing. So understand what your customers' values are and other audiences you're trying to reach. Understand what's influential to them, where they get their information. Don't just ask someone within your company or make assumptions. Actually, you can do simple things like take wins and losses out of your CRM and call them up and offer to contribute to their favorite charity if they'll give you 20 or 30 minutes to just have a conversation about these things, and talk to 15 people, all right, in your CRM, and you'll have learned so much that I promise you would have never gotten from just asking a salesperson or asking the CEO. And then you can do again with your CRM, or you can do lookalike audiences and things if you don't have enough, if you're a startup that doesn't have a lot in your CRM right now. But you can do quantitative surveys asking these same questions. In the book, Trust Signals, I have an example of a kind of quantitative survey that you can use to get that I call a trust profile, to get at a better sense of what is, for my audience, this is what is going to draw people closer to me. An example can be, almost every business today is expected to take some kind of position on social issues. And this can be, look at what Anheuser-Busch just did. I think they didn't do their research. And so they did an influencer campaign with a trans person, and it inspired backlash that they did not expect. They then responded by putting two people responsible for that campaign on the marketing department on leave of absence. So they managed to do the absolute worst thing you do, which is to piss everybody off. They upset the people on the right side of the culture wars by their initial decision, and on the left side by showing that they hadn't thought it through, and then reacting by punishing the people who they blamed for it. Basically, is certainly how it came off. So that's really bad. if you do your research, if Anheuser-Busch had done the research, then it could have been like with Nike with Colin Kaepernick. They chose Colin Kaepernick for their big anniversary campaign a few years ago. He's obviously a controversial figure. When Colin Kaepernick was announced as a spokesperson, a bunch of people were burning their sneakers on social media at the time. Similar. But Nike didn't panic because Nike had done its research. Nike knew that on balance, there were far more people in its customer base, far more of its target audience aligned with Colin Kaepernick than didn't align with him. So they were willing to accept the fact that some people would be upset because they knew more people would feel closer to Nike because they had made that decision. And it proved to be the case. It proved to be the case based on stock price went way up, and they could contribute. They were able to attribute in earnings calls a significant revenues directly to the Colin Kaepernick campaign. So clearly, Anheuser-Busch did not do what Nike did because they wouldn't have taken the actions they did. So I'm not saying they should or should not have aligned with a trans activist or trans person. The point is, you've got a responsibility to a lot of people, the community, your customers, your shareholders, your employees. The only way to make sure you're doing something that works for everybody, that's not going to blow up your brand, is to do your research. You don't take a position on a social issue because the marketing department wants to, or the cool New York ad agency wants to, or the CEO wants to, because that's selfish. Because you're responsible to a lot of people. So do your research, find out what on balance your audience would like to see from you, and the positions you align with and how you put your brand forward should be driven by that. One last thing on it, I guess after this controversy in Anheuser-Busch, they went and put out this ad that was so corny about how American they were with sunsets and horses and all these things. And it was like it was created by ChatGPT. It was so inauthentic, it just felt like, oh crap, all the conservative people who associate beer with, apple pie and the flag or whatever, I better appease those people. Well, everyone on both sides is pissed off now because what you did was so pandering and inauthentic when all you had to do was research on the front end.
Oh, that was a big mistake at the end.
It was. And it's ongoing.
Oh, no. Oh, that's depressing for them. So I love that conclusion. What do you think? So do you think like that one of the biggest trends and just changes in general in PR is going to be, these social matters? Like, is this going to be like the thing for the future? Like that every company is going to have to, kind of shape themselves and put themselves into brackets for what they stand for?
I don't think every brand, but I do think that there is an expectation that brands be what I call, and if I ever masochistic enough to write another book, it will probably be on this, what I call a three-dimensional brand, where what people are looking for, what people used to look for in a brand was, something aspirational, but that tied to the product. So Nike's a great example of, yes, they sell a commodity product. They sell sneakers. So, that's what they started with, but they tied it to the aspiration of being your best, in sports. So, and that the sneakers would help people towards that. So just do it and all that. That's aspirational. But what people are looking for now is something beyond that, where you're not just telling people what you do. You're telling people why you exist and that you have a purpose beyond the product itself. So, for example, if you argue that your product is sustainable, people want you to have more than a sustainable product. They want you to be active in sustainable causes. They want this. They want Otherwise, saying the product's sustainable can come off as insincere and self-serving, because what you don't really care about sustainability because you're not really doing anything except selling this product. So you're just trying to use sustainability to sell your product. And what people want to see is you're walking the walk by taking it outside of the product. When I say three-dimensional brand, I say, your product is your body, but people also want to see your heart, which is your social purpose or a higher purpose. And then the brain is thought leadership, having a point of view on the world, having a point of view on making the world a better place. And that's what brand, it doesn't mean you have to get in some highly charged political debate. If I'm a brand and I want to blow things up for no reason, I can make everything about climate change. That's a political buzzword. I can do all the same things and do all the same good by focusing on sustainability, which is basically non-controversial. Sustainability has not been picked up into the whirlwind in Washington as being, some term that, because I'm, say, conservative, I can't believe in sustainability. I can believe in sustainability. I might not believe in climate change because I associate it with this political debate over climate change. So there are ways I can be all about DEI and diversity without aligning with Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter is a political thing, and I can do just as much good in all likelihood by supporting pro-diversity causes without getting involved in a political issue that might damage my brand. So you can get a lot done by aligning with and supporting and forwarding social causes while being smart enough to avoid kind of those hot button topics that are just going to, give you more backlash than it's worth.
Yeah, it's a little bit safer to go into these things that everybody pro for than strictly these topics that are very, very hot right now.
Exactly.
Would you like to add anything else to this podcast? I feel like we've covered the topic very well so far, but we'll love to leave the space for you.
This has been great. I've enjoyed talking with you about it, and no, I can't think of anything offhand except it's if you're in B2B Tech PR, interested in it, what people like most is when you get excited about it, because sometimes in B2B Tech PR, when they have these arcane technologies and they're doing this stuff that's very technical, if you can come in and connect the dots to show them why why they should be excited about it, that's one of the most fun things about B2B Tech PR. And that's why I think it's a greater challenge than a lot of other kinds of PR for that reason. But the reward can be greater too, because sometimes you see the story and the promise in a brand even more than your clients do.
Absolutely. Love that finishing sentence. Thank you so much, Scott, for participating in today's episode. And yeah, that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure. Anytime.
That's all for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed our podcast, make sure to subscribe on Spotify or YouTube. And if you need more resources on the topic that we just discussed about, head over to our website. See you in the next episode. Bye.